The sound died without warning, the way equipment failures always do, not with a gradual fade that gives a performer time to adjust, but with the sudden, absolute silence that tells everyone in the room simultaneously that something has changed. One moment, Katt Williams's voice was filling the space the way it had been filling it for the preceding 20 minutes, moving through the room with the particular velocity his delivery required. The next moment, nothing. The microphone was dead. The house speakers were silent. And the room, a room that had been loud, responsive, fully inside the set, went quiet in a way it hadn't been all night. What Katt Williams did in the seconds that followed is the part of the story that the people who were there have never quite agreed on how to describe. Not because they disagree on what happened. They don't disagree on that. But because what happened in those seconds is the kind of thing that is easy to see and difficult to name. He kept going, not after a pause, not after a visible assessment of the situation, not after looking to the side of the stage for a replacement microphone or a signal from a production team member. In the same beat, in the same breath, in the continuous motion of a set that had not yet reached the end of what it was doing, he kept going. His voice, no longer amplified, still carrying into the room. His body still in the posture of performance. The material still moving forward. To understand what that moment meant, what the choice to continue rather than stop revealed, it helps to understand what a comedy performance actually is and what technology has done to the relationship between a comedian and a room. What Katt Williams was doing in those minutes without amplification, the specific thing that kept the audience from leaving, from checking their phones, from doing any of the things that audience members do when the contract between a performer and a room temporarily dissolves, was something that required the room to notice a distinction most audiences never have occasion to notice. The distinction between a comedian and a performance, between a voice and a microphone, between the thing itself and the technology that carries it. A comedy set works because the comedian's perspective, delivered through a specific voice in a specific rhythm, creates a shared experience of recognition in a room full of people who came as strangers. The microphone makes that possible at scale. But the microphone is not the perspective. It is not the rhythm. It is not the recognition. Those things exist in the comedian, not in the equipment. And when the equipment fails, what remains is only whatever was there before the equipment, underneath the equipment, independent of the equipment. In the minutes that followed the sound failure, Katt Williams continued the set without stopping, without apologizing for the technical problem, without breaking the frame of what the performance had been before the failure occurred. His voice, unamplified, was smaller in the room. The back rows strained slightly. The dynamics were compressed. But it was still his voice, still operating from the same perspective, still moving through the same material at the same pace, still connected to the same internal logic that had been driving the set since it began. The room stayed. That's the part the accounts come back to. In the kind of club where this happened, when the sound goes out, people shift in their seats. People lean toward their companions. People become aware in an uncomfortable way that something has gone wrong and that the social contract of the evening, you perform, we watch, has been complicated by a failure that nobody chose. The natural response is restlessness, not hostility, not cruelty, just the particular fidgeting of an audience whose connection to the stage has been technically interrupted. The room stayed. Some people leaned forward. Some people who had been in half conversation with the person next to them stopped talking. The quality of attention in the room did not diminish when the amplification disappeared. It changed in quality, became more deliberate, more active, more aware of itself, but it did not disappear. The amplification of a live comedy performance is so standard, so completely built into the architecture of how these shows function, that it has become nearly invisible as a technology. A comedian walks on stage, takes the microphone off the stand, speaks into it, and the room hears them. The transaction seems simple because it has been normalized by decades of performance and equipment design to the point where the equipment disappears. It becomes, in the mind of an audience sitting in a club, simply the comedian's voice. But the microphone is not neutral. It changes things. It extends the range of a voice into a room so completely that the relationship between the performer and the back row becomes identical to the relationship between the performer and the front row. It allows a performer to use vocal dynamics, the drop to near whisper, the sudden burst of volume, that would be impossible without amplification in a room of any real size. It separates the performance from the physical effort of projecting, freeing a comedian to concentrate entirely on the material and the timing and the connection, rather than on the mechanics of being heard. When the microphone is gone, all of that changes. A performer in a room that holds a few hundred people, speaking without amplification, is working in a fundamentally different medium. The voice has to carry on its own. The back rows may hear less clearly. The dynamic range available to the performer narrows to whatever unamplified human voice can produce. And the audience, aware of all of this, becomes acutely conscious of the equipment's absence in a way they never were of its presence. What a comedian does in that moment, when the technology that makes the performance possible the way it has always been possible simply stops, is one of the more honest tests the form can offer. It strips away everything production adds and leaves only the performer and the room and whatever exists between them when nothing else is mediating the connection. The people who were in that club the night the sound system failed have described the sequence of events in ways that agree on the facts but diverge on the feeling. What everyone agrees on, the sound died, Katt Williams did not stop, and the room, after a moment of disoriented silence, began to respond again, not out of courtesy, not out of obligation, but because what was happening on the stage was still happening. Somewhere during the set, the accounts vary on exactly when, the sound came back. Whether it was a production team member who had located and corrected the problem, or whether the failure resolved on its own, nobody who was there has been able to say precisely. What they remember is that the return of sound was not the dramatic event it should have been. The room didn't cheer, didn't exhale with collective relief, didn't mark the moment as the end of a crisis. Because from inside the room, from the perspective of the people who had been watching, nothing had quite ended. The set had continued without interruption. The connection had not broken. The return of amplification was, in that sense, almost beside the point. What the production failure had produced, inadvertently and without any planning, was a demonstration of something that most audiences never get to see. Most people who watch a comedian perform, even a very good comedian, even a very skilled performer, are watching something that the microphone is partially responsible for. The amplification, the dynamics, the acoustic presence in the room, all of this contributes to the experience in ways that are invisible when working and only become visible when they stop. The failure stripped all of that away and left only what Katt Williams brought to the room, independent of everything else. What he brought, what kept the room in its seats and its attention on the stage during the minutes when the technology was gone, is the same thing that had been keeping rooms in their seats long before the equipment failure. A perspective specific enough to be unmistakable. A rhythm internal enough to continue without external support. A connection to an audience built on something more fundamental than any single night's production. The people who were there that night have described the experience in different ways, but always arrive at the same observation: that something about watching the set continue without the microphone made them understand, in a way that watching a perfect production could never have made them understand, what they were actually watching when they watched Katt Williams work. Not the equipment, not the club, not the lights or the sound or the production design. Something that existed before all of those things and would exist after them. The voice that the microphone carried but did not create. That's the part of the story most people never heard. Not the specials, not the perfectly produced performances that captured hundreds of thousands of viewers. A small club, a sound failure, an audience that leaned forward instead of leaving, and the night the equipment stopped working and the performance kept going. Because the performance had never been coming from the equipment,